That's great, man. It's got to be good to see them.
Oh, it's great. Yeah. How about y'all? Did you make it back east and up north to see your folks?
We did. We went up to Kentucky and saw my folks up there, and actually on the way back went through Missouri and did a farm stay at an Airbnb outside of Springfield, and so they had Clydesdales and chickens and all kinds of stuff, and the kids were very happy.
Oh, that is great.
It was cool. We're glad to be back, though.
Yeah, I understand. No place like home.
That's the truth. Even with as much time as we spend at home lately, it's still good to be there after a trip.
Well, this is kind of weird. This is the first time I've really ever worked from home in a Zoom meeting. Normally it's in my office, but yeah, it is kind of a different feel.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Ray, were you able to confirm if we've got our live feed going?
It shows that it's streaming on my end, and Jeff, it's only in a PDF. Do you want that?
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine.
Okay, 1 second.
Thank you. Sorry, I just switched laptops, so.
David Slayton, you've been busy lately?
It's bored out of my mind, Danny.
Well, you're doing good. Keep it up.
Say that again since we're live on YouTube.
Don't record it, please. I'll get in trouble.
Okay, Jeff, that should come to you in just a second. And it appears that I show this to be streaming live on YouTube. I don't know why other people are telling me it's not.
It's live. I just checked.
Okay, good deal. All right, so I think we're technically good. I got a last minute email from Catherine McNeil at TDS that she had something come up and would in the last minute and would not be able to attend. And Commissioner Statler had an emergency that he was dealing with this evening. So those are the two that I've heard from. And I think otherwise we're ready to go.
Well, welcome everyone. Let's go ahead and call the meeting to order at 6:05 p.m. And I want to thank everybody for being on for our initial meeting of RPDO Inc. With the corporate board and starting to bring life into RPDO as a local government corporation. I appreciate everybody with the time. I know you probably have already spent looking at the materials Ray put together. And I want to thank Ray, Elaine, and Amy for all of their hard work over the last few months to get us to this point, putting together the meeting book, reaching out and making all the connections with TCDRS and TAC, and working with Jim Allison and everything else to get us to this point where we're ready to start making RPDO Inc. a living, breathing entity. And I know we're going to have a fair amount of work over the next couple of months as we get the initial startup in place and get all of the board orders in place that we're going to need and work through the decisions we need for the transition to be ready and effective for January 1st. And I'm looking forward to working with all of you. I know most of us have been working together with RPDO as a department in Lubbock County as we make the transition. And I also want to thank Bill McKay for all of his work for RPDO over literally its entire existence, from helping bring it into existence to growing to the point that it's ready to become its own entity as a local government corporation and moving into its statewide level of service with all of the counties that we currently serve.
Absolutely,
So
glad to be part of it.
And we couldn't be here without you, Commissioner McKay. You have absolutely been instrumental in it.
Thanks, thank you.
And so with that, I know we have one new board member. Jeff, could I ask you to introduce Judge Livingston to the rest of the board?
Sure, very happy to. We are joined by Judge Laura Livingston. She has been the presiding judge of the 261st District Court since 1999. Is that right?
That's correct.
And I'm going to try to keep it short, but a very long list of accomplishments because she's involved in so much, including a lot of bar associations. Judge Livingston was the chair of the Standing Committee on Legal Aid and Indigent Defendants for the American Bar Association for several years. The ABA also awarded her the Spirit of Excellence Award just this past year. And in addition to all of her work on bar associations here in Texas and elsewhere, she is also just a very nice person and a very bright person. So I'm very grateful she's here today. So thanks for joining us, Judge Livingston.
Happy to be here. Thanks for the invitation. I'm honored to join this prestigious group and recognize some of the faces. Happy to meet the ones that I don't know and looking forward to working with all of you. Thank you.
Welcome, Judge. We're glad to have you with us. Elaine, would you take attendance of our membership, please, so we can establish a quorum?
Yes, sir. Okay, here we go. William Cox.
Here.
Andrea Marsh. Here. Judge Dean Rucker.
Here.
Judge Laura Livingston.
Here.
Judge Curtis Parrish.
Here.
David Slayton.
Here.
Jeff Burkhart.
Here.
Catherine McNeil. Chuck Statler. Commissioner Bill McKay.
Here.
Rick Wardrop.
Here.
Abner Burnett.
Here.
And Dan Hurley.
Here. A little quorum music.
Yes. There are 11 of us.
Thank you, Elaine. I already did a lot of my opening remarks. The other item I didn't mention I want to is, while of course we have to comply with the Open Meetings Act and be sure we observe our bylaws and our corporate charter, I do want to try and keep the meetings as informal as we can, working with this group like we always have with the RPDO. And as we move forward and make the best decisions we can for the entity so that it can thrive in its new configuration as RPDO Inc. And with that, Amy, could you give us the financial report, please?
Yes, after I figure out how to unmute, sorry. Let me see. We have spent a little over 1.4 million at the end of the third quarter. So we have 1,457,836 that we expended, of which our grant reimbursement was 971,890. We have spent year to date a little over 4.7 million of our budget. And we've received a little over almost 2.7 of our grant. We have almost all of our interlocal allocations have been received. We had troubles getting some of the allocations from some of the newer members, but they have said that they have already mailed it out. So hopefully the end of the week, we will have all of that and all of the interlocal allocations will be received just in time to send the new stuff out. Our fund balance is, or our reserve balance is a little over 2.7 million. I think the TIDC website has a little bit different numbers, but that's what we have as far as right now per Lubbock County. Ray wanted me to give you a little bit of a COVID impact on our travel. So we've not really had much travel since spring break. So about 3/16 of 2020 through the end of August, we've only spent 47,000 in travel. The same time last year we had already spent 284,000. So you could tell we're quite a bit off our travel budget for this year. And it's strictly because we have not been able to travel for the last several months. Just to give you an idea of how our money flows throughout the fiscal year, at the beginning of the fiscal year, starting 10/1, we start receiving interlocal allocations from our participating counties. Expenditures usually flow out bi-weekly, and that would include payroll, accounts payable, and all of that. And then every quarter we get a grant reimbursement based on those actual expenditures for the quarter. We really don't have a typical operating account, simply because we like to say we operate out of reserve, simply because our interlocal allocations are expended within the first and second quarter. So by the third and fourth quarter, we rely on grant reimbursements and the reserve to pay bills and operate. A little bit how our grant reimbursement works is by the 15th of the month following the end of the quarter, we enter an expenditure report into the TIDC website, which is under the Improvement Grant Expenditure Report. And we just fill out it calculates everything. So we just have to enter our personnel costs, fringe benefits, travel and training, equipment, supplies, contract services, and indirect cost. And then basically that website will automatically calculate what our grant reimbursement is, and it'll also generate what our fund balance is at the end of the quarter. And that's really all I have right now.
Jeff?
Amy, quick question. I think it's going on 1 or 2 years ago, we kind of realized that the reserve balance was a little bit high and brought it down. And I'm trying to remember if we decided to bring it down to 1.8 or to 2.2 million. Oh, you're on mute. That's all right.
I thought I didn't do that. Yes, we decided to bring it down to 1.8, and last fiscal year we really tried to bring that down. And I think by the time it was all said and done, we only hit it for like half of what we thought we were going to, and a lot of that had to do with not having filled positions. We had a bunch of open positions last year that we just didn't get filled. So that was a big part of it. So it didn't affect it as much as we thought we were going to.
Got it. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions or comments on the financial report?
Bill, we will touch on this subject again, I think, toward the end of the business agenda, just in passing about the reserve amount currently and what at least is possible going forward as we transition into the corporation. So we'll touch on that again later in the meeting.
Thank you, Ray. And I'm trying to be sure I scroll through the whole screen. Anyone else on the fire? Hearing none, let's go ahead and move on to what's really the bulk of our agenda for tonight, which is item 6. I know a lot of these are probably going to be more discussion items, but there are going to be a few as we move through that we need to take action on. Before we start moving through the items, it's probably prudent to go through and do a review of our corporate bylaws. So with that, Ray, would you be ready to go through the bylaws, or is that more one that you've got someone else queued up for?
No, I don't have anyone really teed up for that one. Hopefully everyone has had a chance to at least look at them. If you have specific questions, I may not be able to answer them on a particularly technical basis. Jim Allison has joined us for this part of the meeting, and I believe he is still here. And so Jim did the drafting on these and is also, I think, available. That's why he's here, is to answer questions and clarify things that are in the bylaws or in the articles. There are, certain things in there that simply I would point out that, one of the agenda items that the board will need to probably act on tonight is related to Article 3, Section 3.01, the open meetings provisions, and determining the public comment policy that the corporation is going to have going forward, including the amount of time for public comment. We don't have public comment on the agenda for this evening. 3.03 is your quorum requirement of 8 directors. For a quorum, there is, I think, what I would call fairly standard provisions about formation of committees. There's indemnity language that takes me back to my insurance defense lawyer days. My position is outlined at 6.01 of the bylaws. And the thing that will come up later on the agenda, you'll find in Article 8, Section 8.01 through 8.03 relates to some of the financial matters of the corporation and authorization of who can do what with regard to checks and deposits and drafts, those type of things. That is at least a matter for board discussion tonight, whether any specific action can or needs to be taken on that. There, Article 9 involving contracts. One of the things that we have a question about when and if corporate counsel is retained is about the procurement provisions, procurement laws and regulations that will apply to this corporation. I don't know if Jim will want to speak to that specifically, but that is something that I think we need to address with corporate counsel. The remainder of those things are pretty, in what I consider fairly standard things. And I would happily turn it over to Jim Allison for comments or to correct any of my mistakes on that or questions that folks may have.
Well, thank you, Ray. This is Jim Allison, and good evening, everyone. First, let me say thank you for your continued service and welcome to your new member. As Ray said, our firm was retained by Lubbock County to assist in the creation and organization of this local government corporation. It is a method to move the RPDO into an independent status, something that we've talked about for several years and are now bringing into action. And so there's been some work put in on this by the what I'll call the old board, and now the new board will take up and assume the responsibility for the operations of the RPDO. You're a unique creation in that you're a local government corporation organized under the statutes of the state of Texas. And a local government corporation is by definition also a nonprofit corporation. You have certain powers and duties, though, as a local government corporation that are very similar to a political subdivision. In fact, under the Interlocal Cooperation Act, you are defined as a political subdivision. And that will expedite your ongoing relationship with other counties besides just Lubbock County. And I know you'll come to how to move forward on those interlocal agreements later in your agenda. As Ray said, we worked on the articles and the bylaws. That pretty much completes my assignment. And I'll be happy to answer any questions about the terms that are contained therein. Many of them are required under either the Local Government Corp Act or the Texas Nonprofit Corporation Act. You're not actually required by law to comply with the Open Meetings Act or the Public Information Act, but in an abundance of caution and I think good policy, you have elected to include those in your articles and your bylaws. So you will be complying with those. The Open Meetings Act does not require an entity other than a county or city to receive public comment. Ray touched on that. However, it is good policy, and if you decide to allow and include public comment on your agendas, you will be able to establish through policy a deadline on the amount of time allocated to each speaker. The purchasing question that Ray raised is one that I gave him a somewhat ambiguous answer when he addressed that question to me. There's an old John Cornyn opinion that says that local government corporations are not subject to any of the procurement statutes. However, the underlying section of the code upon which that opinion was based has been repealed. There is still a provision that makes it clear that you're not subject to any procurement requirements when you construct certain improvements, but otherwise the statutes are ambiguous about whether or not you're under any particular procurement requirements. I have recommended, and this is something to take up with your ongoing corporate counsel when you attain one, that you consider complying with the County Purchasing Act as you have been in the past. It will fit into the purchasing policies that you've had in the past, and you'll certainly be in good stead if you do that, regardless of what might be decided in the future. I think that touched on the issues that Ray had forwarded to me. And I'm going to leave it with you after we finish this discussion about articles and bylaws, but I'll be happy to try to respond to any questions.
Thank you, Jim. We appreciate your expertise and insight and the guidance that you provided us as we've been going through the process. Does anyone have any questions for Jim or any questions about the bylaws?
Bill, David Slayton has put clerical things in the chat window, but I don't know if he wants those addressed or not.
There's just, I just found two little typos that need to be addressed, but it's not that big of a deal. It's, I just sent them to, they're not substantive changes. They're just typographical issues.
Okay, and if I remember right, that's probably one we'll have to work through and post for a future meeting. Correct me if I'm wrong, Jim. Even typos, don't we need to post and go through the amendment procedure for the bylaws?
That's correct. And any typos are Bill McKay's fault.
So is it, should we, I guess the question is, should we, well, are we needing to approve these? Was that the plan? We are not, Ray?
My understanding, and this is Jim Allison's department, but these are established, is my understanding. The bylaws are established by the articles, I believe, but I don't know that.
They are, but for frankly, the purposes of the institutional history and memorialization, I recommend that the board of directors also approve them. And you could do that with the corrections at your next meeting. I do recommend that you go ahead and take that action prior to beginning your actual operations on January 1.
So let me ask Jim, just from the standpoint of some of the actions we were thinking we need to make tonight, can we take any action as a board before we accept the bylaws, or would we need to, and I think we're posted to take any action on any of the items on the agenda. So would we need to approve the bylaws tonight before we take any other action?
I recommend that you do that because there are some of the actions that you're going to take that are under the bylaws. Yep. And then come back at the next meeting, post amendments and correct those typos.
I would move we approve the bylaws as posted.
And that brings up one other item, which we're going to get to in a minute, which also is a bylaw related item, but we need to get to the point of having a corporate secretary. But until we get there, Ray, Elaine, Amy, could I impose on one of you to keep track of who's making the motion seconds and the votes until we get to the point of having a secretary, so we'll have a complete set of minutes.
Yes, we can do that.
Okay, we have a motion to approve the bylaws. Is there a second?
Second.
I think that was Commissioner McKay and Jeff probably at the same time.
I defer to the commissioner.
We'll flip a coin.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of approving and accepting the bylaws?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? The bylaws are approved and accepted.
Thank you, everyone. I'd again like to add my thanks, particularly to Bill McKay and of course Lubbock County for the work they've done to bring our PDO to this point. And thanks to all of you for your continued and future service. I look forward to working with you in any way I can as we go down the road and continue this great work. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim.
Thanks, Jim.
Thank you, Jim. And so, as we just alluded to, under the bylaws, we need to have a corporate secretary. In fact, one item that we'll need to address at our next meeting is Ray had pointed out this afternoon when we were touching base, we don't have posted, but we also, under the bylaws, need to have a corporate treasurer. So at this point, do we have any nominations for our corporate secretary?
And William, before we get there, I think that that we will need to elect the chair, vice chair, secretary, and treasurer, all four.
I believe you're correct. So with that, let's take a step back then. Do we have, and I don't know that we're posted to elect the chair, vice chair. The only thing I think we're posted on is the secretary. I think under, and I'm trying to remember what we had on our, the initial articles of incorporation. Did we list the members or did we list the chair on there?
Looking now.
Now, William, I think you're right. I think under the business items, that's agenda item number 6. The only thing that we have on there is the corporate secretary. So you are correct. We'd have to do the chair, vice chair, and treasurer at the next meeting, next posted meeting.
You are all listed only as directors on Exhibit A to the Articles of Incorporation.
That's correct.
Sounds like our agenda is growing quickly for our next meeting. So with that, at least so we can have our corporate secretary to keep our record of the proceedings. Do we have any nominees for the corporate secretary? And I do not believe that has to be a member of the board of directors. Hearing none, let me ask if Elaine, would you be willing to serve as the corporate secretary?
Yes, I could do that.
Is there a motion to?
Then I would move to nominate Elaine as the secretary of the corporation.
Thank you, Commissioner McKay. Do we have a second?
Second.
A second from Jeff Burkhart. Any discussion?
I believe that second was from Judge Rucker. Is that correct?
It was from Judge Rucker.
Pardon me, I was looking at Jeff and I was muted. I apologize, Judge.
He's more handsome than I
am. He's the one with more hair, the better looking one.
My screen's limited to a Brady Bunch of 9. I'm missing 6 people when I look at it. Do we have any other nominees?
I just have a question.
I'm 100% in favor of Elaine, but where do we feel like it says we can have somebody who's not a member of the board serve as a board officer?
I don't believe there's any requirement that it lists that a member of the board be a corporate officer. Because it's actually the corporate secretary rather than the board secretary, if I remember.
Oh, okay. Okay. So I'm looking at section 203. You're probably looking someplace else.
Where I was thinking is the language that it's the corporate secretary, but I don't believe there was anything regarding the board itself having a secretary. Article 7 says the board will consist of the 13 directors.
Okay, section 2.03 of the, is this the articles? Sorry. Of the articles says the board should have a secretary, but that may be different than the corporate secretary. I'm at page 15 of the meeting book on the PDF.
Yeah, that's the bylaws.
That's the bylaws, sorry.
2.03.
And I was looking in the articles of incorporation, so let me scroll down.
From my previous service on other boards, there's typically a secretary of the board, and then there's a corporate secretary who basically holds the records of the corporation or nonprofit entity ongoing. And so I think that's the difference. I think it's more the who's kind of holding and maintaining the records versus the board secretary. So I think there is a distinction between the two typically.
Well, and we may need to clarify it for our next meeting in the bylaws so it's clearer. Because I'm not sure we have it clearly in here as to, Ray, remind me, wasn't there a section that listed specifically corporate officers? And I thought it was very limited.
The only one that immediately came to mind for me was the one Andrea was citing, 2.03. And I have both of those documents open, and just in a very quick, find on that article document.
Clearly in here.
I am not finding it.
And I'm at what you were saying, Andrea, doing the same. Specifically corporate officers, and I thought it was very limited.
The only one that was the one Andrea was citing, 2.03.
Ray, can you mute? Ray?
I have
Getting lots of audio.
Yeah, it's Rick Wardrop's audio, I think.
documents open.
Rick, you need to mute. Rick, you need to mute your microphone.
Oh, Ray, can you mute him?
I'm trying to mute him. He's frozen on my screen, so I'm trying to mute him now.
There we go.
Anyway, I lost about a minute of discussion there. I'm sorry.
I think where you may have missed, Andrea, was Ray was saying that he didn't see anything besides the section you had cited to on the 2.03. And so the question becomes, I think David's right, we probably do need a secretary for the corporation and then secretary for the board. We're posted for corporate secretary. So I'm thinking that may be more for the corporation side rather than the board side. So at this point, and it sounds like we're probably going to need to have a follow-up meeting fairly shortly to address the other issues that we need to include in getting our officers in place. Assuming we want to go forward and we can defer it until our next meeting, do we want to go ahead and do a corporate secretary at this point, or do we want to wait till we're dealing with the officers first? What's the will of the board?
I would say if there's no rush, we should probably wait and make sure we get it right. I'm just, quick Google search says every corporation needs a corporate secretary, but then another one says the corporate secretary is an officer of the corporation. So that would be, we would want to make sure we get that right, I think.
Agreed. And it'll definitely be cleaner that way. Okay, so moving forward, our next item is the start date for the corporation. And we had at our prior meetings been talking about whether we'd be looking at October or January. And part of it was the time it took going through the filing process with the Secretary of State and the lead time that TAC needs to start insurance coverage for all of the RPDO employees. I think in large part, it's pretty much been decided that the soonest we could be viable at this point would be January 1st. Is that correct, Ray and Elaine?
I believe so, yes.
So guess at this point it would be, is there a motion to make our effective date to begin operation January 1st, or is there any other dates the board wants to consider?
I would make that motion also based on Article 7 of the incorporation documents that just states on January 1st, 2021, the board shall be composed of. And I think that is consistent with everything that we've talked about. So I would move that the corporation officially begins operation on January 1st, 2021.
I second.
And Andrea Marsh seconded. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, we've got a start date for operation on January 1st. The next item on our agenda is the public comment policy. And I think there's probably a couple of items that Jim Allison laid out for us. One is, do we want to allow public comment, which I believe his recommendation was that we do. And if so, what does that look like? Do we have a requirement to sign up in advance of the meeting? Can someone request to speak during the meeting? And is there a limit on time for each person on their comments? And I don't know if there's any other dimensions to that, or if those are even directions that the board wants to go in.
And William, I would say what we have pending in the bylaws under 3.04, I think is adequate. We're just asking people if they wish to make comments to the board, that they sign up prior to the meeting, limited to 3 minutes. And I think that's all very fair and very consistent with the public comment section of the Open Meetings Act and the Government Code.
Any other discussion on open meetings?
I agree with Judge Parrish.
I was gonna say, Judge Parrish, would you put that, can I take that as a motion then that we, since we've already adopted the bylaws, that that become our official open meeting or our official public comment policy?
If that's necessary, I would make that motion that the official public comment policy of the RPDO is contained in our bylaws at 3.04 under citizens participation. That exact language will be posted on all of our agenda documents as well.
Thank you, Judge. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Commissioner McKay. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Moving forward to what's probably one of the most pressing items. I know it was a concern from several board members when we had our last RPDO Lubbock County meeting about board training on open meetings and board training for the RPDO corporate. Ray, did your team have staff recommendation and information on the trainings for the board?
Not a recommendation per se. You will see a bookmark if you're looking at the PDF version of the meeting book. The Open Meetings Act required training provides you the link to go to the Attorney General's website. The video it's a YouTube video that they link to is about 1 hour. And we have 90 days for each board member to complete that training. As you go through the video, you get instructions in the video to receive your certificate. And pending the corporate secretary situation at the moment, my suggestion would be that when board members complete the required training, that they would forward the certificate to Elaine and I so that we can hang on to those. And then once the corporate secretaries and that issue is resolved, we can obviously forward those records or forward copies to the secretary. But I believe we have 90 days, or the board members have 90 days to complete that training.
I have a question, if I might.
Yes, Judge Livingston.
Is that 90 days from now or 90 days from January 1, 2021?
From your appointment.
Okay, thank you.
And I will say I've done the YouTube training. It's fairly quick and goes through one of the other items that Jim Allison had actually brought up in our discussions with him, that it references frequently is the Open Meetings Handbook that the Attorney General's office publishes and updates on a regular basis. To be sure, it includes any updates from each legislative session.
What page is this link on of the PDF?
In your bookmarks, it will say Open Meetings Act required training. It's right under the bookmark for corporate bylaws, and it's just a one-page web link.
Okay, thank you.
Ray, just a question, that to you or to William? Obviously, many of us have already completed the training for our other offices that we're holding. Would the certificate that we've acquired for the previous training be okay for this board, or do we need to get go through this again and receive another certificate that would be specifically for this board?
For my response, Judge, it would be that based upon the wording that I saw that says from that 90 days from the date of your appointment, it would seem to require that you do it again. However, functionally, I can't see the difference if you were able to forward, any of you were able to forward the certificate of training. I think it would only be a matter of the corporation just needing to maintain that record. Functionally, I could not see why that would work. And so that's, I guess, just the lawyer in me reading that statement. But at least I would still defer to whatever our attorneys would say about that. But I would think that your existing certificate would be fine.
And I would tend to agree with Ray, other than the fact it just has the within 90 days, given the fact there isn't a requirement to update it every so often, I would think so. But I think Ray summed up, which is one of the things we're going to get to, is our ever-growing list for once we establish corporate counsel.
The only other comment I would be is if board members with existing training forwarded that, in my mind, the corporation would be in compliance with the statute, because we do have documentation and all board members have been trained. So seemingly that we would be meeting the requirement of the statute.
Any other discussion or questions regarding the open meetings training? And so for the time being, Ray, who do we want everybody to forward their certificates to?
You can email Elaine and I if you would. And for your convenience, Andrea is actually given you an active link in the chat window. for those of you that might be an easier way to get to it.
Which we should not use under the Open Meetings Act. So we should stop using that just for compliance reasons.
Is there, anyone
Is that
know if
what-
there, go ahead, Dan, I'm sorry.
Don't use the chat window. Is that what you're saying, David?
Yeah, the public can't see the chat window, so
Okay.
we can't be having private chat, so that we can't use it.
Got it.
Right. Is there an option for us to disable it when we configure our future Zoom sessions?
I will definitely look into that. I think you can.
Okay, the next item is obviously the key to what we do is the RPDO. We have specifically the position of the Chief Public Defender laid out in Article 6, that the board shall select employ a Chief Public Defender. Ray's included in our meeting packet the proposed job description for the Chief Public Defender. Largely, it's been developed based on the current job description and then adding the evolution with looking at moving from being a Department of Lubbock County into being a local government corporation. So I would ask if everyone's had a chance, and I'm trying to scroll down here to see what page it starts on. It is
21 of the PDF.
22. Oh yeah, 21. Yeah. Sorry.
Has everyone had a chance to review the job description for the Chief Public Defender?
Yes.
And scrolling through the screen, I think I'm seeing head nodding from most of the board. With that, is there a motion to approve and adopt the proposed job description for the Chief Public Defender?
So moved.
Second.
Motion was by Jeff, and who seconded?
Dean Rucker.
And we have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion regarding the job description? Hearing no discussion on the job description for the Chief Public Defender, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? So we now have a job description for our Chief Public Defender, and even though we're not starting formal operation until January 1st, we obviously need to have the individual start performing some of those duties with the local government corporation. And obviously, Ray Keith has been performing admirably with the RPDO and has been absolutely instrumental to us in the process of moving to RPDO corporate. So I would entertain a motion to name Ray as our Chief Public Defender for RPDO corporate by acclamation.
So moved.
Is there a second? Judge Parrish. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Congratulations, Ray.
Thank you. I appreciate that, board.
So now that we have a Chief Public Defender, our next area is the job description for the System Administrator. Has everyone had a chance to look at that?
I have a question, Mr. Cox.
Yes.
I'm just curious, since the effective date of the corporation is January of next year, does Mr. Keith and whoever we hire next enjoy a paycheck from the corporation beginning then, and they continue to be in whatever role they're serving in now and paid by Lubbock County until the end of the year? Is that how it works?
Actually, excellent point, Judge. At this point, we have not set a budget or a salary for either of the positions. So while we have an individual there, we haven't set what that compensation would be, although I think you're right, we probably need to make it clear in our orders that anyone that is currently employed by RPDO is receiving compensation under the current RPDO entity, and that they would not begin to receive compensation from RPDO corporate until RPDO corporate begins its operation on January 1st. Would that address your concerns, Judge, and any concerns anyone else on the board may have?
Yeah, I just want to make sure that they get paid. So if they're happy with that, I'm happy with that.
And just so, and I think probably also from the standpoint of our fiduciary responsibility, it probably ought to be included in our decisions and board orders from this meeting. So would there be a second to that motion?
What's the motion?
The motion would be that anyone that we officially hire as an employee in some form for RPDO corporate that is currently an employee of RPDO subdivision of Lubbock County and being compensated in that position would not receive any payment for services from RPDO corporate until RPDO corporate begins its operation on January 1st.
So my only question would be is, are we permitted to make that motion by the posted agenda? Or would it be more appropriate to make, as we appoint these individuals, as we just did with Mr. Keith, would it make more sense to say that he's appointed as Chief Public Defender for the corporation on January 1st and would be compensated by the corporation beginning on January 1st?
Well, let me ask a question back. I think we could probably go either way, since our posting has discussed and take appropriate action on anything that's listed on the agenda. The concern I would have is if we choose to delegate any authority to Ray moving forward, as we're going through the transition, he would not be able to exercise that until January 1st if we were to make the appointment not effective till January 1st.
Yeah, I guess my only question would be is, this board is the board for the corporation, and I don't think we can make decisions for Lubbock County. I mean, I'm assuming Lubbock County is going to pay Mr. Keith through the end of the year. But I don't know that we can bind them by our motion that they will continue paying him through the end of the year. So I just wonder, I'm just trying to figure out how we would go about doing that. Obviously, I think we know what's going to happen here, which is he's going to get paid through the end of the year by the county, and then the corporation would start paying in January. But I don't know how we can do that with the motion. I'm just trying to figure that out.
Ray, I see your hand. Let me respond in part to Mr. Slayton's comment and what my thought was, which is why I phrased it as if they are being compensated by RPDO as a part of Lubbock County, not that we're binding Lubbock County, but that if that is happening to prevent any potential double compensation. But with that, Ray, what were you going to say?
Just that, the Commissioners Court of Lubbock County would be the one to terminate me. And so I am employed currently by Lubbock County. I assume I will continue to be until the transition December 31, January 1. I would certainly accept the appointment under those conditions that I'm going to remain an employee of Lubbock County in addition to this appointed position without compensation. So from my standpoint, it's not an issue for me. I understand that the board has other concerns, but I have not, resigned or been terminated by the Commissioners Court of Lubbock County.
Well, in our budget that is proposed that we will adopt September 14th, had monies in the budget for the entire RPDO staff. So that department will be funded through December 31st. And it would be the intent for Lubbock County.
Anything anything that Ray does between now and January 1st, we can ratify at that time. And he's doing as can't we, David?
I don't know.
Well,
I'm not the expert on this, but I mean, I just want to make sure we are clear on what we're doing here. I mean, I think we all know what we're doing. The question is how do we put that in the form of a motion?
And I think the simpler thing to do is, I think the real action item that we're doing today is just to approve the job description. Ray Keith has a job with the RPDO through the end of the year, as it's currently formed. And then I think at our first meeting, whenever that is after the first of the year, then we can formally hire Ray as our chief defender. I think I agree. I don't know if we can hire that today. We just need to adopt the job description today.
Judge Livingston?
Well, I was going to say, I'm not sure that there's a reason why we couldn't say that on January 1, when formed, the corporation has already decided that Ray Keith and whoever else will be employees on day 1. I think we could probably do that today without violating anything, because there's, it's all prospective, right? The corporation is going to be effective January 1, and on that day, our employee, if you will, I guess, or employees are these individuals effective January 1. I think that's okay.
Ray?
Just for clarity, the corporation exists. And so the corporation can operate through its board of directors immediately because it does exist. And so it is going to functionally operate as a public defender's organization January 1. Is it, I guess, at least the distinction that I've made in my mind on this.
What's the point of the vote we took earlier that said the effective date to begin operation is 1/1? Is that literally to begin operation, but not to create the existence of the organization?
It's my understanding the organization came into existence once the filing was approved by the Secretary of State.
Okay.
The significance of that vote was that would be when we'd actually begin services as RPDO clients.
In that case, then I think we have no reason why we shouldn't appoint staff whose job will start January 1. No reason not to do that. That way there will be a seamless transition with no lag time, and we won't have to wait until mid-January to have a meeting when people have already been doing work since January 1. So I think we should approve the job description. Apparently we've already done that. And then also approve Mr. Keith and any other employee whose employment will become effective on January 1. That's my suggestion.
I think the other
organizational meeting.
What'd you say, Judge Rucker?
Sorry.
I said, I think that's appropriate because this is really an organizational meeting as we head toward January 1st.
I think the other reason why that's a good idea too is we don't have uncompensated employees working now, which is problematic. I think the appointment, I think, and it's, whoever's taking notes can probably correct, did we just make a motion and vote to appoint?
We voted it.
So did we say effective January 1st, or did we say, was there anything on that?
We didn't have a date as to when it would become effective that Ray was the chief for RPDO corporate.
Well, I'll move that Mr. Keith be hired with an effective date of employment on January 1, 2021.
So is that like technically a motion to reconsider, or
Making a brand new motion.
based on what?
We've already agreed to hire him. I'm just now making an independent motion that the effective date of his hire be 1/1/21.
Second.
Is there-
motion. I second that motion.
Do we have any further discussion on, I think probably, Andrea, going to your question, it's probably a motion to clarify when his start date would be. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, is there a motion to approve? I'm sorry. Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, so that brings us to then the job description, I believe, for the system administrator. And did everyone have a chance to review that job description? Ray, it looks like you were starting to say something. Were you, or?
I just thought I heard someone else talking and I didn't hear what they said.
I think it's
Any-
Rick again. It's Rick again.
Now Rick's frozen again.
Rick, are you with us? You're muted.
He just muted, so I know he's there.
I am.
It's the mountain air.
Do you need a motion to approve this job description?
Correct.
Yes.
So moved.
Thank you,
Second.
Dave.
I'm here. Well, yeah, something like that.
Who is the second?
Dean Rucker.
All in favor? Actually, was there any discussion about the job description? Hearing no discussion, all in favor of the job description for system administrator?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, we have an approved job description for the system administrator. And at this point, let me ask, Ray, did you have someone that you've got in mind that is doing this now? I think I know where you're headed, but I want to be sure we're all on the same page, that you would recommend the board consider following the pattern we've set to be effective January 1st.
I would not recommend that part, but I would recommend Elaine Nowart for that job.
Can I ask a question here?
Sure.
Just from an organizational standpoint, is it going to be our policy that we hire multiple people for the public defender office, or will we be hiring and appointing the chief public defender and letting the chief public defender hire and appoint whoever he wants under his supervision? That's a rhetorical question because I suggest that we appoint the chief public defender and let him or her have control over the employees that he or she wants, underneath our approval of the budget and the positions and things like that.
I agree.
Agreed. Oh, Ray, I see a hand.
The intent was only to cover this transitional period for the board members I anticipate at the next board meeting that I would at least prepare for the board's consideration the entire packet of job descriptions for every position in the RPDO for the board to consider and then approve. And I certainly contemplated that I would be the one hiring those positions. The transition between now and December 31st, this was appointing those two positions was for the purpose of dealing with all of the mechanics that are to come in the next 4 months of getting this thing set up. And so at the next meeting, whenever the board sets that next meeting, you'll get a package of all of our other job positions to approve the descriptions and create or approve or edit those descriptions and then create those jobs. But those are not going to be followed by a recommendation that the board appoint someone for those positions. My position in system administrator was strictly for dealing with interim 4-month period.
And let me jump forward ahead before we continue the discussion on this one. If you look at our agenda under 6, the next few items we've got are corporate counsel, authority to act on behalf of the corporation for some of the things that are going to need to be put in place so we're ready to begin operation on January 1st. The federal employer identification number under J being a great example of that. And just even in terms of signing some of the initial documents, such as the health insurance, which given both where we're at on needing to deal with the other corporate officers at our next meeting, which we're going to need to have in short order, we may need to look at, do we want to authorize anyone such as Ray and or Elaine to take actions based on the board's decisions, sign documents for the board so that we can get some of these process started? Or do we want all of those coming back and then needing to have the board chair or another board officer or officers sign off on each of those? Was where we were looking at in terms of the issues between now and January 1st.
But are you saying?
Go ahead,
Go
Andrea.
ahead. Go, David, please.
I was just gonna say, I'm thinking we're going to want to authorize Ray and Elaine to execute on what we're about to talk about. So if we say we want a federal employer identification number or a health insurance or workers' compensation coverage or retirement, I think it would be wise for this board, as we get to those items, to authorize at least Ray, if not Ray, and Elaine, if she's in that position, to whether she's in the position or not, to execute those documents on our behalf.
I agree with that. I guess my question is whether, if we've already decided to make their employment effective 1/1/21, whether that vote to authorize them to take certain actions in advance of that is a separate vote.
I believe it is. I believe they're doing that not as employees. They're doing that as at our direction.
Okay. Yeah.
A point of clarification. So I understood that the vote we just took was to approve the job description for the system administrator, but I'm unclear as to whether or not Mr. Keith, as the chief public defender, is going to appoint Ms. Nowert or others, or if we are now appointing Ms. Nowert to begin January 1 in the role of system administrator. I'm just not clear about that.
And Judge, you're right on point with the discussion we're having as to, in order to facilitate what needs to happen between now and January 1, there's multiple ways we can go. Which way does the board feel most comfortable proceeding to take care of those? Jeff, did I see your hand up? I mean, we could either do it as we can, and I agree with the point David was bringing up earlier, that I think the intent, and I think most of us were in consensus, is that the chief public defender would be responsible for making hiring and personnel decisions for our PDO corporate, other than for the chief public defender position itself. The question becomes then, did we want to, effective January 1, go ahead and make a selection on Elaine, given the uniqueness of that position, to facilitate things moving forward? Or if we're doing it, as we were just discussing, as a specific authorization on board actions so that things can be done as necessary, and then we do a specific authorization for Ray and Elaine in a different capacity than as system administrator or chief public defender, since those wouldn't be effective till January 1st, deal with it in that direction. Andrea?
Yeah, I think my preference is, I think it's important to maintain that Ray's authority includes hiring people underneath him. So if there's a way that we can just vote to authorize them to take specific actions without encroaching on his hiring authority, that would be my preference.
I agree. I think if we want to approve the job description for the system administrator, fine, or we can, I guess we've already done that actually. Any other job descriptions, I'm fine doing that now or waiting till Ray rings the whole. I think it would make more sense for us at the appropriate time, when we get to the parts of the agenda, to authorize Ray and or Elaine to act on our behalf to get the issues we talk about in place. And that way it doesn't cause any issues, because quite frankly, if we appoint Elaine, then we technically would be the ones who would remove her, and that would seem to be encroaching on his authority. So I think it would make more sense just to do an authorization at the appropriate point for that.
I agree.
That's your motion. I second it.
I don't think we need a motion if we're not, we already approved the posting, right?
We
I think
did.
he's talking about the motion to authorize Ray,
No, it's
Keith,
just
and Elaine
motion.
now to act on our behalf to effectuate whatever decisions we make today.
That's it.
I think those have to be a because for some of them, they're going to need minutes to show that it was a corporate order. So I think we may need a specific vote on each action we take, naming them as authorized officials to effectuate the board action.
Yeah, authorized agents of the board, really, is what they are. Right?
Well, are we going to authorize them as agents of the board in general, or are we going to do it as to the item taking?
Just for the specific actions, I think.
So then do we want to consider a vote to authorize Ray Keith and Elaine Nowert to take any and all necessary actions to effectuate the votes of the board at tonight's meeting?
That was my motion.
That was your motion, David?
That was my motion.
And I think we had a second, didn't we?
Yes, Dean Rucker.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? I'm not seeing any hands up, so all in favor of authorizing Ray Keith and Elaine Nowert to take any necessary action to implement decisions of the board votes at tonight's meeting?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, so that brings us to the discussion of corporate counsel. And Ray, I know you've included a proposal letter for us in the packet. If you'd give us an overview and what your recommendations are.
On page 26 of the PDF, not the page numbers that are actually on the printed page, but you'll see a multi-page introduction letter from the Underwood firm. They are headquartered in Amarillo and then have other offices around the state. This is the only firm that was responsive to my inquiries. I asked or sought to at least talk to a couple of specific firms in Austin that did not reply. And so I think that this firm may be known to some of the either Judge Parrish or Commissioner McKay through some of their knowledge of being in Lubbock for a long, long time. But you have an introductory letter from Matt Wade, a partner in that, or I believe it's a shareholder in that firm, that lays out their experience and their expertise areas. At the very bottom, there is a listing of their firm or their hourly rates for their partners and for their associates and support. And so that is the, they have given you a description kind of their governmental credentials. They're representing governmental entities. From my look at what they do, such that's available to me, they also have practice areas that could handle our employment and human resources issues. They seem to have litigation lawyers as well. So they are not a mega firm that handles absolutely everything on earth. But from my review of the information available to me, they can cover our needs now as this corporation is getting off the ground. And they would, I think, cover most of what we need. And that's what I can tell you. I've had one discussion with Matt Wade, which was really very general, simply to request this type of letter for the board to consider.
Mr. Keith, I would concur. I think I'm very familiar with Matt Wade and his work. The other attorneys that are listed, I'm not so much, but Matt Wade is an extremely good attorney when it comes to governmental law. And the other reason I think I would also recommend that this board choose this firm is they don't practice criminal law. And so if there's there's no way that we could have a conflict going forward with any of our cases. So with that, we'll take the input of the rest of the board, but if a motion is needed, I will make that motion that this, well, I'm not sure how we're doing motions, but if this board needs to affirmatively hire the Underwood law firm, then I will make that motion to do that.
I would second.
Thank you, Judge Parrish and Commissioner McKay. Any other discussion on the Underwood law firm or corporate counsel, at least initial corporate counsel for RPDO corporate?
I just have a question, not about this firm, but about the budgetary issues, like how with TIDC funding, budget changes that are associated with us now outsourcing things that were sort of absorbed by Lubbock, like how all that is working from a financial standpoint. It's not a question about this particular firm.
So Ray and Elaine or Amy, have y'all had a chance to look at how payment of invoices or other expenses during the transition would be handled?
It's simply, well, Elaine may be better able to speak to this. But as of now, as you will see on the agenda, there is up for discussion banking issues in addition to those procurement rules. And so RPDO Inc., the RPDO local government corporation that you are all board members of, does not have any money and does not have any bank accounts. And so the board would need to, in my view, my opinion, negotiate with the Underwood firm on their terms of billing to see if they will agree to defer any billing that's accrued between now and December 31st to a billing period after January 1 when the corporation has funding. Other than that, then the board will have to make decisions about bank accounts and actually funding RPDO local government corporation in order to pay a bill that might be submitted by the firm. That's really I guess the only thought I have on that.
Andrea, does that address your question and concerns?
In part, I'd be curious about whether anyone's had that conversation with this firm, if we're going to vote to take action to hire them, if we're hiring them with that conversation. I guess my other question is, it just seems we're going to have line items that were not part of RPDO's budget. They may have been part of the overhead line for Lubbock. And it could be that the way the TIDC funding works is that it will just pay 50% of that or whatever. But I guess that's my question. That's the second part of my question.
For the TIDC portion of that, so TIDC currently funds 2/3 of the Regional Public Defender Office for capital cases. We plan to continue to fund 2/3 of it, even with a new entity. We did account for, we actually do pay some overhead to Lubbock County. And from what we've calculated so far, those funds should be able to, there are a few positions that the new entity will probably have to hire that they don't currently have, to your point. So HR director and things like that. And from our calculations, the amount that we're paying to Lubbock for overhead right now should cover those positions. We've budgeted everything for FY21 already, and we should be in good shape to reimburse all those funds. So I think on the TIDC side, we're fine.
I have not had any discussions with this firm. I don't have any authority to have those discussions from this board. And so all I've solely is sought out this introductory letter for the board to act on. If the board chooses to retain this firm, then I would ask that as a part of that motion that they authorize me to have that kind of conversation specifically, and that they also authorize me to deal in confidential information of this corporation. And frankly, the rest of that, as a legal stranger to this corporation at this point, makes me a little bit uncomfortable. But at a minimum, I would want authority to have that conversation with this lawyer on behalf of the corporation and to deal in confidential matters of the corporation. Otherwise, I think the board has to do that.
And I would add another dimension to it, which I think probably helps that we have to come back. We also have to have fee negotiations with this firm as well just into what that looks like and be sure the fee structure is something we're comfortable with.
Judge Pierce, would you accept a friendly amendment to your motion that we, as part of that, I think your motion was to hire them, but to authorize Ray to enter into negotiations for the contract that we would ultimately hope to have with that firm?
Well, the fact that it's coming from a friendly face, I will accept a friendly amendment. Yes.
And I would amend my second as well.
We had to amend it,
Right.
right? Ray's got his hand up.
Could I ask or just request that motion or that resolution include my permission, I guess, to deal with the confidential privilege matters of this corporation, such as they exist right now?
And yes, and I will amend that. And honestly, I think that's part of your job description, but if you need that authority, I would say, yes, I will amend that to allow Ray Keith as the Chief Public Defender to have the authority to enter into confidential discussions, attorney-client privilege with the Underwood Law Firm.
Yes, and I concur.
Any further discussion? All in favor of the motion as stated and amended?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion carries. I think we've already dealt with the authority to act on behalf of the corporation previously. The federal employer ID, I think in some ways is also tied up with once we have corporate counsel to advise us on it. But Ray, I know that in looking at it, you and your team had some concerns on the EIN application form.
Sure. If you look at your bookmark in the PDF for employee identification number, there's an introductory short little paragraph there, and then you get to the form SS4. And so in order to obtain this, if you specifically look at items 3, 7A, 8, or excuse me, 9A, there are some questions there that I think have to be determined by the board in terms of responsible parties. And you can arguably say that we fit within any of those 3 highlighted entity types. There's the question of the date of business starting, the first date of wages paid, those kinds of questions that my suggestion to the board was that those ain't be answered in consultation with counsel. So the initial idea was that you would authorize me to take such action to obtain this number, which necessarily includes, in my opinion, talking to counsel to make sure that we answer those questions appropriately. I guess that's really the issue, is because it seems like it will be a fairly simple process once that's done. And I don't know if, we're not reinventing the wheel, but, the IRS, I guess, potentially could wonder what a Chapter 431 entity is and maybe have to deal with questions like that. But otherwise, I think that it's going to be a fairly simple process. It just once those people are identified in those particular areas.
Jeff, I see a hand.
Ray, did Jim Allison offer any counsel as to this, or did he suggest that when we hire corporate counsel that they should deal with this?
He did not offer an opinion on that. I have the impression that that was something that he did not feel like he could do.
Okay, thank you.
And I think based on our discussion, this might actually be something that we need to authorize, leave as a discussion only for today till we have corporate counsel on board and make the decisions there, and then maybe an item to take no action on today and then revisit when we have our next meeting assuming we've made a decision on council at that point.
Yeah, I would just add, having done this for a regular nonprofit before, like getting this number is very fast, but like these boxy checks will determine what tax form they expect from you. So I don't think there's any need to do it quickly because I think it will turn around quickly once we know how to fill it out, but that filling it out correctly could reduce tax headaches later.
Thanks, Andrea. So with that one, I think our next item is K, the grant administrator. Ray, we have on that one.
The purpose of that agenda item is simply for the board. Well, I'm not sure what to do with it at this point, but I don't think I think it is something that can be deferred to a later meeting. The grant administrator agenda item simply reflects the board authorizing, if they choose, they need to authorize someone to administer the grant from Texas Indigent Defense Commission in this organization or outside this organization. That is a function that has been filled by Lubbock County grant administrators. On December 31, they won't be doing that anymore. We believe, it's the opinion of staff, that we can handle that administration in-house. And I don't believe that anything would be necessary until after January 1, so it doesn't typically require a decision. TIDC obviously has a say in this as to whether they will, I think, approve an in-house grant administrator. I don't really see a problem with that, but that is a board question as to who would administer that grant. And again, I don't think that it requires anything be done at this time, other than I want the board to be aware of that question.
For TIDC, there's no reason that the grant couldn't be administered in-house.
And Jeff, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm thinking of at least the non-RPDO grants from TIDC.
Mm-hmm.
I think it has the county judge, basically chief executive for the entity, and then there's a program director who's typically the chief public defender for that entity.
Yeah, I mean, the majority of our grants are to counties. We are authorized to provide a grant to an organization like this in statute. So we're set there. So yeah, I don't see any problems in most of the ones where we provide grant funding to an entity that's not a county. I'm trying to think of any exceptions. I believe they're all administered in-house. I don't think we have any exceptions to that.
Jeff, since this is a reimbursement grant, when this person wouldn't need to be in place really even until after they seek reimbursement, is that correct? I'm just wondering if we can wait till we see who Ray hires for certain positions within the organization and then vote to appoint an appropriate person once we know who's in the corporation.
Yeah, I certainly don't think it needs to be decided right now. Yeah.
And I would just sort of second that suggestion by Andrea by saying I think Ray should just bring that back to us when he brings us the job descriptions for everyone and let us approve them all, and then let him hire whoever he thinks is appropriate for that position. And we'll decide when we decide all those job descriptions. I think we should just include this one with it.
Agreed. Any other discussions, or anyone feel like there's another direction that they think we ought to look at? Hearing none, I think that brings us to at least the next big section is looking at employee benefits. And so we've got the health insurance, at least an initial discussion on liability and workers' comp and retirement plans. So, and I know we've got a lot of information in the meeting book, and I know we also have staff recommendations. Ray, who would be the best person to start us off with a walk through the health insurance?
I think it's probably me to start. I have a feeling Elaine will need to be involved, and Amy may, in this discussion. If you take a look at page 35 of your meeting book, you'll see the kind of the worksheet for this, and there are, the first part are references to the materials that are in your meeting book pertaining to this. And I don't know how slow to go through this or in how much detail. Ultimately, you do have recommendations on page 40, the staff recommendations for action items on here. And so if I am too far in the weeds, certainly stop me, and I will focus wherever the board would like. What you have essentially in your meeting book on page 36 and 37, I believe, 35 and 36 is the start of an explanation of your current healthcare coverage for our PDO employees through Lubbock County. They have, it's through Aetna, and they have two choices, a team choice HSA and an Aetna PPO. There are distinct differences between resident employees of Lubbock that are employed by the RPDO and those that live outside of Lubbock. And so one of the good things about the creation of this local government corporation is to be able to address and correct and deal with some of those problems for out of Lubbock employees. And so you have really a brief summary of the existing health coverage. It's very brief. We can certainly provide as much detail as you would like. We are not privy to the individual coverage choices of our PDO employees. And so in terms of budgetary items and the actual money that would be the cost of the corporation for healthcare, we don't know. We can only make estimates of what that is. And we will not know a final cost until the enrollment process is done and the employees have either agreed to participate or they opt out. And so beginning on just a little way down on page 36, you have the board's 3 proposals. There were initially tax health group, if I could, with the board's permission, I was about to forget. I have Kathy Davenport, who is with TAC, and she is the kind of the contact person for this discussion on health insurance. And I have her kind of on, she's graciously been on standby here just as a resource to answer questions of the board. Would anyone object to me bringing her in at this point?
Please do.
Please.
Give her just a second to join. And it looks like her audio has now connected. So Kathy Davenport has joined us from TAC. And Kathy, we are at the agenda item where the board is addressing the health plans. And I was just kind of starting in kind of a description of the 3 choices that we had. TAC initially provided for review an HSA 500 plan, which you see as item number 1, which is very similar to the existing plan for Lubbock County employees, or the HSA option for Lubbock County employees. In my request, I asked for other options, particularly copay option plans. And so TAC provided what you see as options 2 and 3, plan 1300 and plan 1400 NG, and their prescription options that are different from the high deductible plan. And again, I don't want to belabor this, but under a high deductible plan, when you go to the doctor, you pay the full amount of your doctor visits or the full amount of your prescriptions until your deductibles and your maximum out of pockets are reached. And so going to the doctor can be a particularly expensive proposition. Under the code, but you are able pre-tax to designate, depending on whether you're single, family, under the, I believe it's IRS provisions. But personally, I can push $7,100 a year as an employee family participant into my HSA. And so that comes out pre-tax. That's certainly a benefit to all the employees. And then you pay for those doctor's visits as you can, depending on what you choose to contribute or fund your HSA with. Plan 1300 and 1400 are simply copay plans, which many RPDO folks had before we transitioned here in Lubbock. And those are where you simply pay your copay and you have a prescription card when you go to the doctor. And so you're out of pocket, significantly less money. And so what I've attempted to provide you there in 1, 2, and 3 are brief summaries of those plan options. And so as you look at those, Kathy is clearly the expert on those 3 plans. And so I would encourage you to ask her technical questions about those different things. We are not privy to the employee choices for these things. So we're unable to tell you under any plan what those things would cost. And then they have also provided dental coverage, vision coverage, and then a life and accidental death dismemberment coverage options that you will see as the pages proceed. The one thing that I want to direct the board's attention to is the insurances. It costs, if you will, it costs what it costs. TAC expects to be paid X amount of money, per employee, depending on what you pick. This corporation board, in addition to choosing a particular plan, will choose how much, if any, the corporation contributes toward the employee's health care, whether that is none, really any amount that the board chooses. And so what we have tried to do, just by way of example, you can see on page, I apologize for the scrolling, but you can see on page 56 of the PDF. And that is a spreadsheet that Amy put together that gives you an idea of what the cost to the corporation would be under any of these 3 plan choices. And then purely arbitrarily, we picked where the employee pays nothing, in other words, fully funded healthcare from the corporation, where the employee pays 50% less than they currently contribute to Lubbock County plans, and then the same employee contribution as they do under Lubbock County. And so the first block, if you will, is that HSA 500 plan, the high deductible plan. And what you see in those 3 options shows you what the employee cost is biweekly, what the cost to the corporation would be, the employee's annual cost, and each of those cost options are divided among employee, employee children, employee spouse, employee family. And under tax, as my understanding, under TAC, you are either employee only or you are employee +1 without regard to whether that's a spouse, a child. Am I right about that, Kathy?
Well, you would still have the tiers.
Okay.
So like on the employee plus children, on that one, that could be 1 child, or it could be 10 children, sorry. And that price is not going to deviate. And if you'll notice the employee plus spouse, where it's just the employee and spouse, that's a separate price. But again, on the employee plus family, you could have an employee, a spouse, and a child, and it's that rate. Or you could have 10 members in your household that you're covering, and it's the same rate.
So looking at that block in terms of the cost of the corporation, if you look at that HSA 500, and the first grouping is where the employee pays nothing. And so essentially the annual cost for an employee and a family would be $20,000, $247 per employee family unit, if you will. If the employees contribute the same amount that they do now, that cost to the corporation is $15,827. And you can see the amount that the employee is contributing. So for me personally, under my existing HSA, I contribute $170 pre-tax biweekly. And so my annual cost for my employee family coverage is $44.20. And so what we're trying to show you, just in terms of examples, is a rough estimate of what those costs would be to the corporation. And again, you won't know that until those choices are made under any of those plans through enrollment by the employees. You can compare your far right column and see the difference between the HSA plan and then what I would call the higher tiered plan 1300 copay plan. And then the one below that would be the 1400. So in terms of employee benefit, the 1300 is better than the 1400. And that gives you some idea of what the cost variations would be on any of those three plans. And so under any of these plans, all employees of the RPDO, regardless of where they live, have access to the same network. They have I believe, a much bigger network. They're a part of the Blue Cross network, who is the provider behind tax plans. And so the RPDO employees that live outside of Lubbock are immediately kind of getting that benefit. There are a couple of other discrepancies I'm happy to talk about on each of those different plans. But as you scroll back to 30 to 55, 54, those give you some more details about the specifics of each one of those plans and what the copays look like, what the deductibles are, what the maximum out of pocket is. And so I don't know how many, if you've looked at those before, and so I don't want to just be telling you things that you know. We have provided you with our current dental benefits through Aetna so that you can see what we have now. You can then see what the TAC proposal is for dental benefits. It does the same thing for vision. Superior vision is what we currently have. And then you see TAC's proposal for vision coverage. Voya life insurance, and it's important for the board to know that through Lubbock County, all Lubbock County employees, but in this case, all RPDO employees are provided $40,000 of basic life insurance and accidental death and dismemberment. And that is paid by Lubbock County. That's employer paid as a benefit to employees. And so I think what you would see beginning on page 63 is the start of tax proposal for comparable plans for $40,000 in basic life and AD&D. And as you continue to scroll, page 66 will give you kind of a cost calculated in terms of per $1,000 of coverage. And so I think the intent was to provide employees as close to what they have now as we could, or as could be provided to them. And so ultimately, you have a lot of details and information in there that, you know, I don't know how much you want to know about those things. And I'm happy to answer questions on this. And I know that Kathy is better equipped to answer them than me, but I will tell you that page 42, I'm sorry for the jumping around, is a blue bar at the top of that page. And it shows you the cost differences between those three different plans. And those are employee only examples. Well, no, they're all there actually. So you can see what the cost differences is. You're paying about $42 more for the higher tiered PPO copay versus $18 more for the lower lower copay plan, as opposed to your HSA plan, which is the cheapest. The only other real differences I would point out are for Lubbock County employees who participate in our current HSA. If under the TAC proposed HSA, they would see an increase in $900 a year in their deductible under an employee only plan, and I believe about $1,800 under employee family. That is a direct, I guess, if you will, increase in cost to the employees under that plan. And Elaine may need to tell me, correct a whole bunch of things I said, or tell me what I'm forgetting. And the last comment I would make, and I'll hand it over to her, but on page 40, you will see what staff recommendations are. And obviously this board will make those decisions, but what the intent was to provide the recommendation of staff for what we believed was the best for our employees under all of these circumstances. All of those obviously have cost impacts to the corporation. There are some alternative things that are listed in there. I think that any decisions that the board make or any motions will have to be altered from the language that I have there, because it did assume the appointment as chief public defender to do these things. And so I will probably ask that the board be fairly specific in the things that I'm authorized to do going forward with this in terms of enrollment or putting this in place. So the recommendations of staff are on page 40. I will turn it over to Elaine or Kathy Davenport to clear up any muddy water that I just created.
I think it was, what he said was pretty clear. But if there are questions, I think we can answer them.
I have a couple of questions. If go ahead, Jeff, did you want to go?
Oh, that's okay. Go ahead, David.
Just a couple of questions to make sure I'm clear on everything. So is it accurate in saying that the closest to what the employees currently have is the HSA 500? Is that accurate?
Yes.
And the closest to what y'all have now would be, what your employees have now would be the HSA 500 under the employee contribution under Lubbock County section of that list that you provided.
Correct.
And it looks like from your recommendation that recommendation 1 is that we look at the plan 1300 NG plan. Is that?
Yes.
Is that accurate? Okay. And I guess maybe this question is for Kathy. I'm just curious as to kind of, obviously y'all serve a lot of counties and other entities. Can you give us some indication as to what's the most, kind of what's common, what other entities are using with regard to insurance?
Excuse me, to be perfectly honest, it's all over the board.
Okay.
It's the 1500 plan, that 1300 NG, $1,500 deductible is about the median. I am more familiar with the counties up in the Panhandle because that is my region. And I will tell you, 80% of those counties still have their original, what we call grandfather plans, that has the 0 deductibles, the $250 deductibles. But once we get out of this territory and get in everybody, it's that $1,500 deductible is pretty much the median.
Okay.
What our counties look at is they try and keep that deductible as low as they can, because most counties can't compete with their regular employment market in their area. So they pay more towards the benefits than what they do salaries.
Understood. Ray, how many employees currently would be covered by this benefit?
The RPDO has 49 employees as of today. I think, were we given the numbers, the raw number of how many actually participate, Elaine?
Yes.
Obviously we don't know what they will elect under the corporation, but go ahead if you have those numbers.
So there were 44 that actually participated. And some of those are just employee only, but they were throughout. Some of them did not participate even in the HSA, though. They participated in the health insurance plan, but they chose not to participate in the HSA.
Jeff?
Kathy, in order for the insurance to take effect January 1, when do you need an application from this entity?
We need the signed contracted paperwork no later than October 6th from the board. Then whenever, based on whatever plan y'all go with, we've already started working on a plan. We would start getting the actual individual, whoever wants to enroll, applications. We would start doing that process in October.
Thank you.
And one more question I forgot to ask of you, Kathy, which is if this board were to make a decision today and say, pick whatever, plan 1400, and then we decide at some point down the road we want to change, is there an opportunity for us to do that? And how often when is that time frame or when we can do that?
Yes, every year we go through the renewal process, much like you would what you're doing now through Lubbock County. And at that time, you can make whatever changes you want to. If you want to lower that deductible, you can, or if you feel like you do need to move to the higher deductible, or quite simply, if the employees love the HSA plan, we can do that next year.
Any other questions on the options we've got before us? One other one that occurs to me is looking at this and the options, and obviously it goes to item T on our agenda with the budget, is there is a different fiscal impact with different choices here. Ray, any idea with what the staff recommendation is versus some of the other options? How, because obviously we do have a limited fiscal universe on our options. And if we increase on health costs, we're going to have other areas. And of course, there are other costs like we talked about earlier that RPDO corporate will have, it has not had as part of its direct expenses currently. Do we have any idea what a rough projection would be on a budgetary impact on the different options?
I'm not sure I can answer your question very well because I think at best it would be a guesstimate and kind of trying to estimate how many people are going to participate under any one of those plans. So I don't know, Amy or Elaine, I'm not sure how to answer that.
And I'll clarify a little bit with, I understand people may make different elections when they see whatever option's ultimately chosen, but just at least for me, it would be helpful if we could see a comparison, assuming people made the same elections they have now, what those would look like compared to the different options on the fiscal impact, so we can be sure we're not creating a significant challenge for the corporation moving forward and that it's something that's sustainable.
Are we able, Amy or Elaine? I don't think we know existing staff, whether they are employee only, employee family. I don't think that's information that we are allowed to know. So y'all correct me if I'm wrong, but we can't really estimate that because we don't know. As you can see from those charts, there's obviously a really substantial difference in cost, whether you're employee only, employee spouse, or employee family. And I don't think we have the information to base that on. Elaine or Amy? True,
we don't know that information, and it's hard because Lubbock County is self-funded. So the numbers that we budget on currently is based on, I think it's like $7,500 per employee per year, but that is simply based on what they're told as far as what their self-funding requirement is. But we don't know individual, like what I have, what Elaine has. I mean, we don't know that because that's information that we're given.
And I know the Lubbock County has been covering these folks, but has RPDO, and I can't remember, it's been a few years since I worked on this. How is RPDO paying for employee insurance costs for our employees, or has RPDO been paying for employee? Is it the 7,500 number you just gave?
Yes, it's based on what I guess Lubbock County comes up with a different number each year, but like our budget, I can look at that really quick.
doesn't have to be exact, Amy. I just wanted to see like generally. So it's not that RPD has not been paying zero.
Right.
In other words,
Right.
it's
No,
not-
we have been paying something. It's usually like about a little over 300,000, I think, and that's just health insurance. I think, well, last year I had 414. So, I mean, we do have a substantial amount in there currently coming out of our budget already for health insurance, dental, life. I mean, all of that already comes out of our budget.
So
Is it possible that we can vote on just the plan now, and then we can come back and revisit the employee contributions at the next board meeting so that we can get the ball rolling in what kind of plan and all the things that TAC needs to get it going?
I mean, I have a idea / thought about this. This is probably one of the biggest financial decisions we'll make. The only other decision that's bigger than this is the employee salary line item, I would think. So this one's, to me, is having a fiduciary responsibility. This one's really important for us to get right. I think my concern in particular with, I would love nothing more than to reduce the employees' cost of insurance. But part of my thought is whether or not for the time being, we should keep their cost at the same level they're paying now, because they won't experience any change. So that's that would sort of narrow down the lines that we're looking at. And it sounds like we can go back and adjust that as we need to, because right now we're sort of dealing with a complete unknown. And so it's hard to just say we're going to do X, Y, Z, because we don't know what that cost is going to be. And once we see the cost, we can make adjustments as needed, I think, to address that. And as far as the difference between the HSA plan or the 1300 plan or the 1400 plan, I'm not sure I have a strong preference. There's not that big of a difference in cost to the RPDO between those, whether it's, but, that's my thinking on this, is to kind of look towards, I trust the staff who have evaluated the plans, and as far as their recommendation, I have no problem with that, but I would like to see us try to keep the cost as low as possible, at least for now, until we see what it's going to look like, and then we can make adjustments from there.
I guess I have a clarifying question about that. My understanding is that part of the issue is that the cost for employees had been significantly different based on whether they were in Lubbock or whether they were out of Lubbock. And so that if RPDO were to keep an average cost per employee that is the same, that could still result in an increase for the Lubbock-based employees and a decrease for the out of Lubbock employees, because the whole point of this is to kind of bring their costs in line. So I guess if we're trying to keep the cost the same, which I don't think is a bad, which I think is fine as an approach, like what that means when you have two classes of employees who have had different costs, and that's one of the motivating factors for changing our structure. I guess I don't. So more, I don't really understand how different those costs were and what the median would be and how that affects those employees in those two buckets.
And I guess maybe I can shed some of this, some light on the cost to RPDO. So right now, currently RPDO's budget pays about $7,800 a year per employee for health insurance. And under even the 1300 plan, that cost per employee is about $77.50. So even that 1300 plan is basically the same amount as what we would budget now for the HSA plan that we have under Lubbock County. We still pay that same amount into that fund.
That would be if they're self-only, right?
Right.
Obviously, if they do family, it's quite a bit more than that.
Right.
22,000. if we did the entity paying for the whole amount.
And remind me, was it something in the neighborhood of 44 employees participating currently?
You're muted, Elaine.
Sorry. Right now we have 44 employees that participate. Now, when it was more, if it's more equal across the board, we may have some of those that do not live in Lubbock County who would choose to participate just because of the cost difference in it. But I know some of them do not participate in the Lubbock County plan because of just the cost difference in it.
So is it safe to assume that the employee cost for Lubbock-based employees is likely to go up in many scenarios, and that the out-of-pocket costs for non-Lubbock employees will go down?
Yes.
As part of this process? Okay.
Yes.
Elaine, if I remember correctly, the deductible for an out of Lubbock, a non-resident Lubbock employee under the HSA is still $2,500.
Right.
Per employee only. And it's currently $1,600. And so your Lubbock County employees, that's where they see the deductible increase of $900 for employee only, or I believe $1,800 for employee family. And so your out of Lubbock employees are not getting a cheaper deductible under the HSA 500. They're keeping the same deductible, but they lose all of the hassles with, Carrie knows better than I because she lived it, but the network issues and, their out of pocket ended up being significantly more, because I've never been an out of Lubbock employee. But I will just tell the board, one of the primary reasons my recommendation is for the NG 1300 plan is because there is an across the board reduction to $1,500 in that employee only deductible. And so while Lubbock County employees receive a $100 deductible relief, if you will, your out of Lubbock County employees receive about $1,000 under the employee only deductible relief.
Is it true that the premium they're paying, whether they're in Lubbock or out of Lubbock, is the same?
No.
The premium is different,
Lubbock County employees right now are much lower than what the the Aetna plan itself is. So that our employees that live out of Lubbock County, their plan is higher, and they don't have a choice but to participate in the Aetna plan and not in the Team Choice plan. It's based on geography.
And the number that you've provided us here as to what the current employees are paying, is that a Lubbock County current employee pay amount? So in other words, the out of county employees are likely, if we were just to keep it the same as what the numbers you have here, that Lubbock County employees are paying, then the out of county employees would actually see a reduction in their premium, and the Lubbock County employees would see a equal amount. And this is a little bit of
Lubbock County employees would stay the same. Lubbock County employees would stay the same. Their deductible would go up under the HSA plans.
Right, but under the 1300, the deductible would go down, and they would keep paying the same amount as what they're paying now. Out of county employees, deductible would go down. They'd be in network now, and their premium would go down.
Correct.
And I don't know how many of the board members know that, but that's the discrepancy, is that if you're a Lubbock resident employee, you have a choice between the Team Choice HSA and then the Aetna, their PPO plan. If you're out of Lubbock County, you cannot choose the Team Choice option. You only have the, I guess what I would say, the more expensive PPO option.
Yeah, and Ray, that's because Lubbock County has a hospital district, and so we've got that contract with the hospital district to provide that break for Lubbock County employees who can go to UMC and the benefits of the hospital. That's the difference.
And
So
I would just say, as a state of Texas employee paying premiums for state of Texas health insurance, just for comparison, state of Texas employees for family pay $1,800 a month for their portion of the coverage. So I think maybe board members need to be able to gain access to the, I'm just kidding. So, I mean, I think the plans before us, the various plans are appear to be good options. I mean, the state's paying basically that same amount for the insurance too. So I think tax proposal here, well, all their proposals look really appealing to me.
And we've sort of talked around some of the fiscal side, but the other one is Ray, from the standpoint, obviously we get a much more equitable situation with the changes for the people who are not in Lubbock County. Of the choices, and I know you made the recommendation on going for the non-HSA plan, what, based on what you've seen from your team members and where they're at and the impacts on them, do you think would probably be the most beneficial option for all of our PDO team members?
Well, there are some assumptions part in my thinking about that, but essentially the critical things for me in that plan are, if you increase their deductible and you increase their out-of-pocket, Lubbock County employees, that's, I believe, 16, so that's about a third of your workforce, have to come up with another $900 or $1,800 a year out of pocket. So that basically equates to a salary reduction. And so in actually between the HSA plan and the copay plan, my thinking is essentially, as you know, I'm the highest paid employee in this organization. So the HSA plan is fine with me. I will max out my contribution every year to the HSA, and that, you know, that money builds. But for our folks that do not make the money that I make or our higher salaried employees make, I am making a judgment call that they would benefit much more from having a copay option than having to foot the bill under an HSA plan until they reach those deductibles. And so at the core of it, you know, I'd personally probably be just fine with an HSA, and I have no idea what, you know, the various opinions, and we certainly don't know how many, you know, how much employees fund in their HSA if they participate at all. But I think ultimately my recommendation is based on the bigger benefit to those folks who have a harder time at $40,000 a year. You know, theoretically, they can still contribute the same $7,100 that I can toward their HSA, but the reality is that it's much more difficult for them to do that than me. So when I come down between those two things, that's why the recommendation is what it is. And you know, obviously, I know that's only a recommendation for the board, and I certainly appreciate the unknowns in terms of the finality of cost in these things, because we don't know about participation. But the board, you know, as a reminder, has two clear choices in which plan to choose, and then ultimately that question of cost to the corporation will be determined. And those are only examples, you know, fully funded, 50%, and the current rate. I mean, the board is free to choose anything in between. But ultimately, we wanted to give you as much information as we could in terms of examples, trying to run those numbers. So that's the reasoning behind the recommendation that I made.
Judge Livingston?
I'm just kind of have a, I mean, this stuff makes my head explode, but I'm comfortable with the recommendation with regard to the NG 1300 plan. My question is, what do we do about it today? I mean, are we saying that we're going to authorize some contract negotiation with TAC to explore what it's going to be? Are we going to ask somebody what their plans are? Should they keep their job with us in January? I mean, I just don't know sort of logistically what decision, if any, we can make today, given sort of where we are. That's kind of my question, but I'm totally comfortable with the recommendation of staff.
Right.
My understanding, Kathy, again, will probably need to jump in, but my understanding is, in terms of the recommendations that you have, I think on page 40, is that the board select that plan, or in fact, select any plan that they chose. But then the follow-on would be to authorize the chief, well, would be to authorize me, and frankly, you're going to need to authorize a couple other people to take the necessary actions to provide this. And so what I think is going to be incumbent on that, if the board were to make a decision tonight, then I would be on a Zoom call with Kathy Davenport in the morning, and she would tell us, this is what I need in terms of the application process. And she kind of laid out that timeline. So if the board makes a plan selection this evening, that allows her to then start her process. If the board wanted to revisit the corporate cost arrangement, that I believe is totally irrelevant to her. That is strictly corporate business. As long as TAC has paid their premiums, we have coverage. And so that would be, I think, the steps that would happen as I see it.
Any other questions or discussion?
Just to follow that up, would that be an effective date of January 1 as well? That the plan effective date would be January 1?
Yes, so the enrollment timeline, and we talked with her earlier this, I've lost track of time. I've talked with her in the last several days about the timeline here. And if they get a decision, they can start the paperwork, if you will, on their end. And then they would have Zoom calls with the organization, probably more than one, to answer questions about the plan choice that the board made, so that the employees understand those things. They would also then make available one-on-one consultation for those people that needed to discuss those matters privately. And then they would begin the enrollment process. The enrollment process, as Kathy explained, for the initial year of whatever plan we choose will be a paper requirement. So there is some extra time involved, which I think urges a decision made in terms of timing, because it's going to be paper transactions. In year 2 and going forward, those things will be able to be done through an online portal, but we will be dealing with 49 individuals in paperwork and them asking questions. And so I think those things would be taking place between now and I believe mid-October, but Kathy would be better to speak to that.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Jeff, did you?
Yeah, thank you. I just want to make explicit something that I think a lot of folks are thinking about, but we haven't really talked about, and that is recruiting and retaining talent for the agency. And it hasn't always been the easiest thing. And in fact, you know, Ray, my understanding is when you all are recruiting folks, really you're up against OCFW, which is a state agency. You're up against the federal CHOOS, the capital habeas units. And I don't know, I like the staff recommendation the more I think about that when it comes to attracting or retaining talent. And from Kathy, from listening to you speak, it sounds like that recommendation, that 1300 NG, is kind of the middle of the road. You know, and so I don't know, that makes me fairly comfortable. And the costs, I know we don't know exactly what they're going to be. It doesn't seem like they're wildly out of step with the cheaper options though. And I'd feel comfortable going with the staff recommendation on this. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. Any other discussion? Hearing none, do we have a motion on how we want to proceed then?
Can I, sorry, before I've tried to get in there, I just want to clarify one thing and then have a statement. I stated earlier the cost of state insurance, and I got a correction that that's the total cost. The employee cost is $600, so that's not too far off from that. The only thing I would say, I'm with Jeff. I'm totally comfortable with N1300 NG. I'm not comfortable. I don't know if Jeff was meaning this. I'm not comfortable yet with the staff recommendation on lowering the cost by 50%. I would be more comfortable with sticking with what the staff are used to paying right now for the in Lubbock staff, and the out of county staff getting actually a reduction in what they're paying, and then us evaluate. And I don't know if we decide that tonight, but at least if I'm comfortable with that going forward, and then coming back and reevaluating after we know what the real costs are, whether or not we want to make adjustments to that.
Just as a comment for the board members, on your page 40 recommendations, those are separated out. The recommendation 1 is the plan choice. Recommendation 2 was that corporate cost element. And so that it certainly I mean, it's written out in contemplation that that might be what the board wants to do. So just to point that out if you're looking at page 40.
I agree. I think for today, in order to get Kathy working on the issues she's got to work on and have individual consultation, well, sort of broader conversations and then individual conversations, in order to get that ball rolling, it sounds prudent for us to make a decision about the plan if we feel comfortable doing that, and then leave these details about reductions and so forth for the next meeting, so that at that point, once Kathy's had those conversations, we know who's in, who's out, who wants it, who doesn't, what it's going to cost. Then we can make some sort of more informed decisions about that at the next meeting. That's my thinking.
Kathy, would that work for you?
And actually, that would work for me. This is something completely new for y'all, so we're willing to work with y'all on that how we can. I do. We need a decision on not only the medical, but the dental, the voluntary vision, and the life. It's not an all, you know, once you vote for the medical, you get all of it. It has to be separated out. So I would need separate kind of votes, or you can lump it all into one vote, but I need a yay or a nay on those other plans.
Those are reflected in your recommendations 6, 7, and 8 on page 40.
So can I just ask one more question?
David?
This question might be for you, maybe a question for Ray. But I know whenever I'm looking at insurance options, one of the things I look at is what is my out-of-pocket cost going to be? So I worry that if we're not making that decision tonight, or at least giving some indication as to what we're thinking, that might hamper employees as they're making decisions, which I assume they'll need to make in October. By the way, it sounded like you said earlier, maybe we're planning on making that decision before then, but I wonder if the board would be comfortable in saying, you know, I know we're looking at making a choice on which plan, but then also saying, and we might revisit later, but we feel like it won't be any more than what a current Lubbock County premium rate is, or something like that for this year. I don't know if we would go that way, but I just sort of feel like we ought to give the employees some kind of indication about what their cost will be going forward.
And David, I agree, and that's one of the reasons we look to separate RPDO from Lubbock County. I mean, this is just one of the big reasons. So I agree 100%.
I agree too. I guess I'm wondering, Bill, when are you thinking we need to have this next meeting to vote on officers and things? Because like I look at these numbers and I'm having a hard time figuring out what is the out of pocket, like what is the percentage that keeps the out of pocket costs as consistent as possible, given that we have two groups of employees who have disparate out of pocket costs.
I'm thinking we probably ought to get together in the next couple of weeks so that we can get the decisions made and start moving forward with some of the other decisions. I know obviously the corporate council's going to need to be in place before we can do some of the things like our EIN, as you pointed out, being sure we make the correct selections. But then my other question to that would be, and this is sort of a question back to Kathy and Ray and Elaine and Amy, would that give you enough time to get a little more detail out? Because similarly, I'm concerned with, as David pointed out, I know all of our RPDO team members are be concerned about how is this going to impact them with what the decisions look like and what their costs are going to be and where they're going to end up once we get a decision made. So would coming back in a couple of weeks be feasible to have that additional level of detail to facilitate making a decision for the board? Or do you think y'all would need a little more time than that?
And I'm wondering what, Bill, what information are you thinking they would bring back? I mean, I sort of feel like if the delay would be because we want to consider it more, I think. I sort of feel like I have almost too much. I mean, I feel comfortable personally with the plan. I'd be fine moving forward with the plan decision tonight. The question about what that cost looks like and how much the organization is going to absorb versus the employees is the one that I'm struggling with.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. But I mean, I think in terms of information, so like at UT every year we get a cheat sheet. This is your current out of pocket. And for RPDO, that might be 2 columns. This is your current out of pocket Lubbock resident. This is your current out of pocket non-Lubbock resident. And then what can we do in this 3rd column? This is what you are under the new plan that gets close to continue, like not being a big shift up for anybody and hopefully being a big shift down for the out of Lubbock residents. I mean, it's just like, it's a table of very like simplified information that just shows what the premium differential is going to be.
Well, let's take it back a step then. Are we at a point where the board feels comfortable choosing a plan? And if so, do we have a motion to go with a plan choice, and then we can come back and look at what we're going to do on the amount of funding that comes in from RPDO versus the employees' funding, and then they can really make decisions. Dean Rucker?
You're muted,
I'm
Jay.
sorry, you're muted.
I hate that being reminded, but I think I figured it out. But taking the information, the staff recommendations on page 40, I move that we adopt staff recommendations 1, 6, 7, and 8. That leaves the cost issue and all that to be determined later.
Second.
We have a motion and a second then for the recommendations 1, 6, 7, and 8 on page 40. Do we have any discussion on that?
Go to bed.
Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, so I think we've gotten through the health insurance issue. And I think most of the rest of our items, correct me if I'm mistaken, Ray and Elaine, are more discussion issues so that the board can begin considering them, especially since even on banking we may need, and procurement, some advice from our corporate counsel.
Bill, item O is something that needs to be taken up tonight. And I have a resource that's been standing by as well, like Kathy, on that particular issue for questions. So
let's go to O.
I think that O needs to be addressed now.
Okay. Before we do that though, I think Kathy Davenport needs for us to decide if we're going to cover dental the same way we are now, and if we're going to offer vision benefits for the employees to opt into, and that accidental disability. I think she has to have those things to go all in the same plan.
I think they were all covered in the vote.
They were
Is
all
that 6,
listed.
7, and 8?
Yes.
Okay.
So I would just say thank you very much, Kathy. I think she may be off the call, or I don't know if she's off the call, but thank you for taking time out of your evening for this.
Thank you for the late evening and the insights, Kathy.
Absolutely no problem. And I've told Elaine and Ray, I'm available anytime. And that goes for y'all also. If you ever have any questions or, just need additional help, you can contact me through Texas Association of Counties. Just give them my name and they will get you to me. Okay? Y'all have a nice evening.
You too. Thank you.
And Bill, if you are going to move to O, item O, I have brought in Christina Fox into the meeting. She's with TCDRS, who is the current retirement plan provider for Lubbock County and RPDO. And so we have a proposal from her, from TCDRS, and she is here just like Ms. Davenport was to correct me when necessary and actually answer questions that you all might have about the retirement plan. But I believe this is another one that's time sensitive for them to begin their work on this. And just for the benefit of the members, this material is bookmarked retirement proposal information. And the substance begins on page 74 of your book.
Thank you, Ray. And Ray, I think what you were looking at was, at least as a starting point, laying out what would be comparable to what Lubbock County currently provides.
That's true. I think the plan going along has been to provide essentially the same retirement benefits that everyone has now. And so on page 74 of your book, I have given you the references to some of the material that's in your plan. If you want to look at it, it's important for the board to know that until the corporation makes an application to TCDRS, they do not make it an eligibility determination formally until that time. And so I think that's one of the reasons this is time sensitive. We do not expect any problems. There have been no red flags or anything, but the formal approval for our entity will not happen until the application is made. And so at the bottom of page 74, per the Acrobat document, you see the rough provisions, the 7% employee mandatory deposit, 200% match. Vesting period remains the same. There is no loss of vesting time to RPDO staff. They will have a second account through TCDRS, or for some of our folks, a third or fourth account. But everybody will have at least 2 accounts now. I will tell you that one of my questions back in March, when the folks at TCDRS made a presentation to us, was to try to explain to someone that is fairly mathematically simple how changing to a second account did not cost our employees the power of their compound interest. And so with a lot of patience, they explained that to me. And so I am satisfied that our employees don't lose the value of that compounding interest, because as your plan grows, you are earning interest on your increasing amount. And so ultimately on page 75, you see the staff recommendations. The wording will need to be changed again in any motion. And it contains the second provision that says, and we are assuming that there's not going to be any problem, but once they make the eligibility determination on application, that I'm authorized to take the necessary actions to facilitate enrollment of employees through TCDRS to have that plan in place on January 1. And so I think it will be much similar to what you heard about the health insurance. I would anticipate that TCDRS may have Zoom meetings with the organization and with individuals privately to consult with them about their retirement plan matters. And so you can see there's a link provided to you for the application that's made. If the board would like to look at that, I'm happy to answer any questions that you have for me, but truly Christina is here because she actually knows what she's talking about on this.
Christina, is there anything else we should be aware of before we begin our discussion of the TCDRS proposal?
No, I think that Ray did a good job of summing everything up. He's got a great memory because it's been a few months since we spoke. It was certainly pre-pandemic. I will say that he is correct that a formal application does have to be filed on our website. And one of the first immediate steps is that application gets routed through to our legal department. And I have to have full authorization from them that you are a valid political subdivision that is qualified to be a part of our retirement system. So they make that determination. And Ann McGeehan, our general counsel, offered that if you have your bylaws, and Ray, if you want to send those to me via email, we can speed the process up even before submitting the applications so that they start reviewing those, and the application process would go a lot faster that way. After that's submitted, even though our actuary has already performed a preliminary cost of the plan based on the workforce that would be coming from Lubbock County into this new entity at TCDRS, we would need to rerun those numbers and use that officially. So we would ask that information be generated onto an Excel spreadsheet that we provide to you. That then goes to our outside actuary for cost analysis. And at that point, we would come back and for sure give you the rate that would go into effect January 1st, 2021 and remain in effect for the remainder of that plan year as well as plan year 2022 or calendar year.
Ray?
You're on mute.
If you look at page 78 and 79 of your book, it's what's called the Bucknall letter and the Milliman letter, which explains how they arrived at their cost figures. The 9.28, which is their estimate that those numbers, that's what has to be rerun to verify that. So if there's going to be a difference, you know, it will appear there. I think from when staff looked at this, we were pleasantly surprised at what that contribution rate ended up being. But again, that's a pretty long time ago discussion too. But the board does have those two letters at 78 and 79 if you'd like to see them.
And just for clarification and background, I'm assuming, but so the board has it and we're on the same page, that the estimate of the 9.28 is at least consistent with about what we're seeing right now as a Lubbock department, just from a budgetary standpoint.
Yes, that's true.
Bill, can I add something real quick?
Please, Jeff.
Just so folks, I don't know how many other folks on the board realize this. Under the old entity, we had a committee that explored creating this new entity. I served on that, Commissioner McKay served on that, Bill served on that, and Ray served on that. One of the main criteria we were looking at is ensuring that people still had the same retirement benefits and that everything that they'd put into it in Lubbock would carry over. So one of the big reasons we're a local government corporation is because of TCDRS and the ability to stick with them. You know, I've sat in the meetings with Christina and with the general counsel, Ann McGeehan. I'm satisfied with the staff recommendation, but I realize that those of us on that committee have had a little bit more time to digest this. But I'm very comfortable with the staff recommendation, and I'm glad that it keeps benefits fairly comparable to what they were as Lubbock employees.
Judge Livingston?
Well, that's helpful for me because I was going to ask if the 200% employer match was typical, or and if it is, then I don't have any problem with the staff recommendation either. I think the 7% is pretty typical, and the vesting period should stay the same, and they ought to get credit. And I think all that's, my only question was about the employer match and whether or not that was a typical arrangement. And if you've already looked at that, and that would be, if it were a corporate committee, if that would be a committee recommendation in addition to the staff recommendation, that seals the deal for me.
As a former Lubbock County employee, I can tell you that is their match currently, 200%. So they're not changing anything. As a person who still holds an account for Lubbock County.
Just as an employee, our retirement plan has, you know, I think it's generally known that we have an excellent retirement plan. We've had, you know, some health insurance issues, but the retirement plan that people have under Lubbock County is terrific. The only other thing that I would bring to the board's attention is page 83 and 84 and 85, which is an email exchange, some correspondence where staff tried to come up with as many questions as we could that might create a complication or a problem for employees. And so you have that there. In red are the answers from TCDRS. And so to our satisfaction, you know, we feel like the employees are transitioning over and will be similarly, you know, they're going to be treated the same as they were previously.
Any other questions or discussion on the retirement plan?
If you're ready for a motion, I would be ready to make one.
Please.
I would move that the board go with staff recommendation 1 and 2 on the retirement, which would be to authorize Ray Keith or his designee to make application to TCDRS for participation in the retirement program on the terms that we've talked about. And if the TCDRS approves eligibility following an application, that we authorize Ray Keith or his designee to take necessary action to facilitate enrollment and retirement plan start on January 1st of 2021.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, motion carries. I know we're running long. I know we've got several people who have time commitment challenges. Ray, is there anything else that we need to take action on tonight, or the rest information?
I just want to say to thank you to Christina, because I know she has to duck out. She also devoted a chunk of her evening to this, so thank you very much.
You're absolutely welcome. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Christina.
We look forward to continuing to work with you. Thank you. I'll be in touch, Ray.
Thank
Have a
you.
good evening.
I think that item M as in Mary and N as in Nancy are, I believe, things that need to be discussed with council. I would like to be authorized by this board to have those same conversations with council and the liability insurers on that. Because I think in determining coverage limits and comp provisions and those kinds of things, I don't particularly want to make those kind of decisions without the advice of council on coverage limits, policy exclusions, all those sorts of things. So I would ask for authorization to have those conversations with council. I think that the interlocal agreement is in your book for informational purposes. We have attempted to give you a redlining as to what the new interlocal agreement will look like, or at least the start of that interlocal agreement. The board needs to be aware of, and I think it will kind of necessitate, in my opinion, a fairly quick new board meeting, because counties under the new corporation will not sign a new interlocal agreement. No, I take that back. They will sign a new interlocal agreement. And so we have got to get that interlocal agreement to county government, in my opinion, no later than about November 1, for those folks to start their discussions about that interlocal agreement. There are going to be questions, I'm sure, from counties about what's going on here and why are the changes. And they are not drastic changes for the participants, but I think that the board will need to address that interlocal soon. The human resources manager position, that's one that it does not need to be addressed tonight at this point. Corporate banking is an issue that, I think the board is going to need to act on. And there is some question about how the procurement rules impact the ability of me or the board members, if I was authorized to talk to banks. I was given a little bit of a red flag about that, just to be careful before we had those conversations. So the corporate procurement and banking are kind of interrelated, and I think would require some opinions of council. The budget issue was simply provided in your materials, I believe, is the last page, to give you an idea of what our current budget looks like. My chief public defender report is largely informational. However, I would again ask for a fairly quick board meeting if we could, because there is an issue that I want to put before the board for informational purposes that relates to personnel. There are timelines involved in that issue, and it implicates the long-term planning and strategy and the structure of this organization. And so that I had prepared to give you a presentation on that this evening. And there is time sensitivity for that for staff. Other than that, I think that setting future meetings would be the only thing left, in my opinion, that perhaps we need to deal with.
Let me ask on the liability and workers' comp coverage, understanding that you need the advice of counsel on that. Don't we need to have the next meeting to make a decision on actually retaining counsel, since we've got to have the negotiation on fees and so forth prior to getting into those discussions?
That's correct. I was yakking at length thinking that that would have been approved. So you're right.
So then if we're looking at a meeting in a couple of weeks, do you want to go ahead and touch base on the issues in your report on the planning side on it? Or are you comfortable if we wait till the next meeting on that and then we look at our next meeting?
At this point, the members have been here 2 hours and 45 minutes. So it would, for me to explain the situation, I think would take probably 30 minutes. There is not a decision to be made. It's informational for the board about decisions that I'm going to have to make long-term, and that ultimately I think the board will need to know and they're going to be involved in. I don't know at what level the board will wish to be involved in that, but it's certainly something that's time sensitive. And so I'm happy to do it now, but I'm really at the board's pleasure on that.
So let me ask, what's the pleasure of the board? Do we want to, Judge Livingston?
I'm a wimp and I need to go because we've been at it since 6 o'clock. It's 8:45. I'm wiped out, and I promise you that I won't hear half of what you tell me if you're going to spend 30 minutes this time of night telling it to me. I'm just being honest. I've been at it since early this morning, and this is like my 16th hour of the day. I'm done.
And I have some commitments here that I need to take care of.
I look at people's faces and I can tell that they've reached saturation for the day.
I know new board members are supposed to be quiet and shut up for their first couple of meetings, but on this point, I must speak up.
So let's go to the one item we need to talk about on our next meeting. And I appreciate everyone giving up their evening tonight. What's the board's preference? Would you prefer evening meetings? Would you prefer to meet during the day? And then when do we want to look at to get together again?
If there are meetings that could be open-ended like this, probably evening is better for me, because I think a lot of people kind of have, this was my 4th video conference of the day. And all the others were stacked up 1 hour after the other, and I had to, get right on off of one and on to another. So that, whatever y'all need to do is fine with me.
I also agree that night would be better.
Yeah, it's really hard for me to carve out time during the day, even for a shorter meeting, because of court obligations. So evenings are much better for me.
Well, let's see if we can come up to a consensus real quick. Would the same time on Wednesday, September 16th would be 2 weeks? Would that work for everybody?
Yes.
Yes.
Commissioner, do we need to look at a different date?
I've got a conflict on that evening. So
Well,
I don't know if we can do it. We can do the survey like we had done earlier.
Okay.
Of that week, the middle part of that week, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday would work.
Great idea. Let's do a doodle poll and then we can find out where we get the best match. And I'll also help let people escape tonight because I know it's been a long day for everybody. I do appreciate it. Thank you very much, folks. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
Right.
What are the date ranges you want me to do the doodle poll for?
The 14th through the 17th.
Okay.
Andrea, you have.
I was just saying Ray was frantically waving while you were about to.
Okay.
Move to adjourn.
Adjourn. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank y'all.
Bye, everyone.
Folks.
Have a good evening.